Hello, welcome to Fireside Chats. I am Magela Pillai, and today I have in the studio with me Sister Denise, who has been practicing Rajyoga Meditation for over 40 years. Today's topic is an exciting and controversial one entitled Reincarnation. We all have our personal views on the subject, but today we will see what comes out of the mouth of Sister Denise on the subject. This series focuses on spirituality. We look at how spirituality impacts on your consciousness and how you as an individual can ask yourself important questions like what your relationship is with yourself and how you relate to God, whether you have a deep and meaningful relationship with God or is He simply a name or a concept to you. Sister Denise, very warm welcome to today's show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Reincarnation. Yes, let's have it.
Well, there are in this world many ideas, as you said. Some of the religions are subscribed to the idea of reincarnation. Hinduism, definitely. Buddhism. Then you have Christianity, Judaism, Islam does not subscribe to the idea of reincarnation, but then there is the question of going to heaven or hell after death. So no matter what you think, there is always this sense of continuity. I think people are very drawn to this desire for immortality. You remember the mummification of the pharaohs and all in Egypt. Why? Is because of this possibility that the spirit can return to reanimate the body. And you know, in some religions, especially in the Abrahamic tradition, as well as also in some parts of Hinduism, there is this idea of the Day of Reckoning, a time at the end of the world when everyone is called to account for their actions. And so this implies that the person who might have died thousands of years ago, but they're still accessible and can be called. So I think that there's a sort of an ambivalent thought about this. In the knowledge and practice of Raj Yoga that we learn in Brahmakumaris, the concept of reincarnation is gone into in quite a lot of detail. And of course, the context of the Raj Yoga of Brahmakumaris is, of course, India, where the majority of people anyway subscribe to the ideas of Hinduism, where reincarnation is part and parcel of the belief system. But there are many people from other parts of the world, other cultural and religious backgrounds, who subscribe to the idea of reincarnation, even though it's not really there in their culture. You know, and I'm one of those. I've always thought, there has to be reincarnation. If this is all there is, it doesn't make sense, you know, but not everybody feels like that. And then there's another idea which I think has a lot of bearing on the question, which we do learn about in Brahmakumaris, and that is that there are many, many souls. All of them are eternal and immortal, but you know, a few of them come down in the early period of the time cycle, and the majority come down in the later period of the time cycle. So there's a variation in how many reincarnations different souls will have. So then the question arises, when you look at yourself, you know, how many births have I had? You don't know, you know. So then, okay, do you think you're an old soul or a new soul? You know, an old soul is somebody who's been around a long time, they've had lots of reincarnations, and here they still are just about, you know, old soul. Then you have others who say, no, 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 I'm a new soul. This is it. This is me. Here I am. And I think that actually one needs to validate that internal intuitive feeling, because, there are many, many souls who incarnate once, and then they, when they've completed that life, they return back to their original place, which we call the world of silence, the world of light. Other people have different names for it, but somehow, whether people believe in reincarnation or not, seems to be fairly widespread, the idea that you came from God, you will return to God. And of course, a lot of people who are theistic, they believe that, okay, God is the creator of me. And then they will sometimes use expressions like, well, when I die, I'm going to return to my maker. So definitely that implies that when I die, I'm still around. So again, you have this ambivalence about, if I die, do I cease to exist? Because I can't go back to my maker and cease to exist. It's not possible. And people, I think, fairly universally really don't feel comfortable with the idea of ceasing to exist. And this is one of the reasons why people are afraid of death, is the very thought of ceasing to exist is really horrible. You just don't know how to face that, manage that, So, for me, throughout my life, I've always thought, no, that makes absolutely no sense at all. So I never entertained the possibility of ceasing to exist. So that never was a problem for me. But there's a lot of people who do think about that. Mm. And in the world of scientific materialism and so on, a lot of the intellectual community will say, no, there's nothing after death. That's it. So do whatever you have to do now. Or they say you only live once, things like this. So there are all these beliefs. But comes the question, if you reincarnate, and there's a sonnet by Shakespeare about that. We have to look it up. If you reincarnate, do you improve? Do you evolve? Or do you, get worse? Do you devolve? Because this is the big question, are we in a state of continuous evolution, or are we going the other way, or are we remaining the same? This is the question that was put by Shakespeare in that sonnet. So definitely the bard was thinking about this subject, and that was, 400 more years ago. So that means that even in England, where the idea of reincarnation is not very current, it's still part of the culture. It's part of the thought, it's part of the literature. So that means it's in the air. And, when you die, or when somebody dies, well, you can't track them. I mean, in Buddhism, there is the possibility of tracking where someone goes. In Hinduism and in some of the animist religions, there are ways to track where people go. And so, of course, then they do subscribe to the continuity of the spirit. But whether that means reincarnation or whether that means having continuity on a different dimension, that varies from belief to belief. But in Brahmakumaris, we say, when I leave this body, I will take another one right away. I will not hang around. And I will take another body according to my karma according to my sanskaras. Sanskaras are the impressions that are created in the soul from the karma. And so this is why it becomes very, very important. It matters what I think, it matters what I say, it matters what I do, because this will determine my next life. So if you do negative karma, your next life will be, the consequences. And this is why we would say that, okay, you may get away with a lot in this life, but it'll come, payment will come in the next life. Sometimes people say, well, why is it that such and such baby is born in such terrible situation? And so somebody who is looking at the philosophy of karma and reincarnation will say, well, according to the ideas of reincarnation and karma, in their previous life, they had to have done something that produced that situation. You see, and then people will say, well, that's not fair, or that's very harsh. And yes, it's very often looked at as harsh because there's no mercy, You reincarnate according to your karma. And if you don't like that idea, it doesn't make any difference. So, because it's not scientific proof, you have to say, well, you subscribe to that idea or you don't, And myself, I definitely feel that, yes, reincarnation operates in that particular way. And in the larger time scale, we would say that, okay, a soul can incarnate, can come to Earth at the beginning of the time scale, the time cycle, and you would reincarnate throughout history, which I think is a good idea because I don't want to miss anything, to be present for the significant events of history, to move around from this culture to that culture, to, play out all of the potentials that are inside. Because, as a child, they say to you, okay, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you look inside, well, I could be a lawyer, I could be a doctor, I could be a train driver, I could be an athlete, I could be a pianist, because all of those potentials are in me, but you can't do all of it in one life. So if you have several lives, well, you can do one this time, one that time, etc. So to me, the idea of reincarnation is great because you have all the time in the world, you are there for eternity, no one ever gets lost, and you have every opportunity to fix your mistakes in subsequent times. So for the present time, well, knowing a lot of information about it, there's a very strong incentive to make sure that you do the very best karma and create not only a subsequent good life, but a whole series of subsequent good lives.
Sister Denise, memory and reincarnation. The fact that people have no memory of their previous incarnation is what causes a lot of people to believe that it doesn't exist. Why do we forget the past? Why is there no, at least a 1% memory of the past so that the truth can be carried forward from lifetime after lifetime? Because there's very few who have an inkling as to their previous incarnation, even in their childhoods. And that is why the children who do remember are studied.
I think that there is a sort of safety mechanism. So when you leave your body, you leave everything. And even there are sayings in India, when you die, the world dies. And then you reincarnate, you're in a completely different situation, you have a different parents, everything is different. But you do not start speaking for a little while. And those who subscribe to the idea of reincarnation also point to that there are certain times when a baby will be happy for no reason, be unhappy for no reason, and the thought is that perhaps they are remembering something, but they aren't able to speak. In India in particular, there are many, many cases of very young children who speak about their previous lives, and then by around the age of 4, they kind of forget it. That's a very, very common thing, and because it is part and parcel of the culture, people don't find it particularly unusual. In the Western world, where reincarnation is not part and parcel of the culture, somebody who does remember their previous birth will be punished for it or ridiculed or something like that, that you're making it up, you know. So children learn pretty quickly to keep quiet, you see, because the first sign of from an adult that what you're saying is not acceptable, they'll just shut up. They know better.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that they don't hold on to it, and maybe they'll speak about it if they can maintain the awareness. They may speak about it much, much later when they're not the little one who's being punished for having an idea that's not orthodox. But at the same time, there are also a lot of people who have dreams which point to something in a previous birth. You know, what happens is that if there has been a very traumatic death, the impact of that death will stay with that soul. It won't disappear. And it may take the form of a phobia or, you know, fear of drowning or whatever. And when they're doing some sort of psychological work to get over those phobias, in some cases, there'll be a link made to you have this fear because you died this way, you know. And so these are all anecdotal type of things, not proofs at all, but it's enough for a substantial number of people to say, you know what, it makes more sense to me that there is that than that there isn't that. But it's not something you can sort of impose on people or forbid or something like this, although of course there are plenty of people who would like to do that. Another thing that happens is you meet someone and you say, I know you, you know, and you kind of carry on where you left off. And it feels as though you've known each other for 1,000 years, and most likely you have. But again, all of these are indications rather than proofs. You know, people say, okay, prove it to me. It's not that kind of thing, because it's, you know, between a life and another life, there's a gap where nothing scientific can put any finger on, you know.
Sister Denise, you sometimes hear the expression, so-and-so, if he behaves badly, will in his next incarnation become a crocodile or arachnid or something nasty. How does it work? What are the laws of incarnations? Human incarnation. Can you ever become a dog because you happen to be a vet and love animals? Or how does it work? Tell us the parameters.
A human soul is a human soul. A dog soul, a dog soul. Souls are like seeds. When you plant them in the body, they grow into that. If you plant a mango seed, you get a mango tree. If you plant a cabbage seed, you get cabbage. And so all the different species are different souls, which in the reproduction process, you know, a soul will come into an embryo And in the olden days, not so much nowadays, in the olden days, when a woman would feel the first movement of the child inside her, that would be called the quickening. And quick is a word which means alive. So that will be the time when the soul enters the body. But of course, the religions will say, well, no, we don't subscribe to that. We have different ideas about it. So that experience of the woman is completely discounted, but the terminology still is there. And definitely in the philosophy of the Brahmakumaris, it is said that the soul will enter into the womb in around the 4th, 5th month of pregnancy, where the fetus begins to move and the mother begins to really have a relationship with the unborn child.
So the soul doesn't enter the womb just after conception. It enters later.
Later, yeah.
Okay.
Because I think that the embryo has to have, eyes, nose, hands, ears, feet, it has to be developed to that extent because of what happens to the soul in the womb. And so this is another aspect of the Brahmakumaris' knowledge, that when the soul enters the womb and enters the fetus, that is where a lot of the settlement of accounts of the previous birth will occur during that time, because the body, it's a very small body, but the what we call the subtle body from the previous birth is there too. So you have your new little body that's about to get ready, but you have your subtle body of your previous birth, and the soul is still identified with the previous life. And then when you emerge, you get born, there is a period of transition where one subtle body of the previous life fades away, and all the memories and everything, and the new subtle body of the new birth takes form. And so generally we say, well, something like the first 4 years of a child is where all this happens. And when a person is remembering their life all the way back to the beginning, a lot of people can't remember back further than 3 or 4 years. They can't really remember what they were like when they were 1 or 6 months old. So I think that is connected with this idea that, the person, the soul, sort of engages with this new role, this new identity around that age. And this is you can say a very esoteric part of the information, but it's quite interesting to consider it in that way, because a lot of people have questions about it. So that is the perspective that's given on how this process takes place.
Sister Denise, I'm sure that the law of karma comes into play when one looks at reincarnation, because it's about the journey of the soul.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't, if you think of karma, then it implies reincarnation. If you think of reincarnation, it implies karma. They're absolutely tied in. And people who say there's nothing like reincarnation, they will say there's nothing like karma, because the whole thing about karma is the consequences are experienced in subsequent lives, or something you're experiencing now is to do with a previous life. So if you deny a reincarnation, you're also denying karma.
So if one is aware that whatever you do, you either rewarded for it or punishment, or...
Well, this is why, people say, if you do that, you're going to be a crocodile, you see. Right. It's not true.
Okay.
It's a threat.
Okay. Is that to, modify your behavior?
Exactly. But it's a lie.
It's a lie.
I mean, you may reincarnate and have something which could be termed a dog's life, but not as a dog, as a human being who is living what you might call a dog's life.
So there's some value in those threats then.
In a sense, but it's misleading because you won't actually change species. And then the other thing what is also said is, the human life is the best life, the most advanced, but then if you look at all the humans at this time, they don't seem all that advanced.
Okay, we'll have to stop here, and because this has been such a pithy subject, I think we'll take it up further in our next episode. So thank you so much for your sharing. For those of you who have found this subject a riveting one, I'm very glad to hear that you did. With every answer that Sister Denise gives, there's 1,000 more questions that pops into mind. So we have decided to have Reincarnation Part 2. And the deepest message that Sister Denise has shared is whether you believe in reincarnation or not, it applies to every single human being, because the soul is eternal, and the bodies that it takes, the human form that it takes, simply changes from birth to birth. Well, thank you for joining us, and goodbye for now. We hope to see you in Part 2 of Reincarnation.